Today we have a recording from the 2014 conference, Dear Earth. Dear Earth was a forum for people to come together through talks, workshops and sharing to experience and explore a deeper connection with the Earth and our collective future. Wendy Cook's fascination with nutrition began during her wartime childhood. In the midst of deprivation and food rationing, the rich abundance of her mother's organic garden made a profound impression. In her 20s, married to satirist Peter Cook, she discovered the artistic and magical effects that food could have in creating a convivial atmosphere. During this period, she cooked for many well-known names, including John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Dudley Moore, and Alan Bennett. But it was only later, through her daughter's chronic health issues, that she came to study and understand the deeper aspects of nutrition. Through her studies of macrobiotics and the works of Rudolf Steiner, new insights were gained, including the effects of nutrition on consciousness, as well as on human health and the environment. She is the author of the book Foodwise, Understanding What We Eat and How It Affects Us, and also the book The Biodynamic Food and Cookbook.
Lovely audience, but I've just come in from an experience that Scariff is not going to recover from in a short time. It's 3 hours of being in the market square with great concentration, so if my brain is completely addled, you'll have to forgive me, because what I'm going to try and share with you are the fruits of 8,000 years of development of food on this planet. How about that? I've been working with Steiner's ideas for over 40 years on nutrition. I've always cooked, and I was the first person to give John Lennon garlic, apparently. He enjoyed it very much. He would have preferred baked beans. I've had an introduction to anthroposophy and through the nutrition through my daughter being so ill with asthma. And after all the kind of terrible things that allopathic medicine does, like steroids and adrenaline shots, I knew there had to be some other way. And via Findhorn, this is in the 70s, 1975 or so, I found everything that I've been working with for the past 40 years. In 2 weeks at Findhorn, I discovered an anthroposophical family whose children had all been educated at Michael Hall Steiner School and macrobiotics. Paul Hawkin, who's now a very important activist, he said he cured himself of asthma through using a macrobiotic diet. And so I came to Emerson College, this is in Forest Row in Sussex, and I wanted to learn what this strange business was all about. Somebody told me that my children, when they were adolescent, all the colour would be taken from their art classes. And I thought, wow, I can't imagine anything more torturous than that. So I better go and study this, otherwise I'm not going to be able to support the teachers. And it was really because adolescents whose souls are so turbulent don't need lovely wishy-washy watercolours. They need stone, charcoal, clay to come up against something really, really that faces them. So this was just one aspect of the education that I started to understand. And then to try and understand the nutrition, because I heard strange things like don't ever give children mushrooms, and giving potatoes, particularly to children, will make them very scatty, and so on and so forth. These isolated comments that you've probably heard to how to put it all together, because they are scattered. His contributions on nutrition are in many different vectors, mainly to the workmen, the Gerstian. But this is what I've kind of somehow ferreted out of or put together in what I think is the most important contribution, because there's so much confusion about nutrition these days. You know, this diet, that diet, vegan, raw foods, Stone Age diet, I gather, is the latest thing. So, and yet 2/3 of the world are malnourished. So where do we actually come together on this crucial aspect of how to feed ourselves? And that's why this talk is called Where Have We Come From and Where Are We Going To? Because agriculture is about 8,000-10,000 years, maybe older. But when we sit down to a meal, whether we're in a cafe, in an aeroplane, in our friends' houses, there will be elements there. Salt, pepper, milk, coffee, tea, wine, perhaps, bread, members of the nightshade family. Things that, you know, maybe animals would never dream of attacking. So what has kind of progressed us in this continual searching for new taste experiences, new experiences that have altered not only our own biochemistry, but the earth's soil, the way we use agriculture, the way we use this earth's precious, tiny topsoil. So Michael Schmidt last night gave a very moving description of how when you plough earth, you're cutting into it. And the story of the first plough is in ancient Persian times. This Zarathustra, this initiate, this high initiate, for whom the six-pointed lily is an emblem, he had in the legends this golden plough. Now can you imagine this priestly activity with a golden plough opening the earth? So it will give us more food, more surface, but to do it with that kind of reverence. And as we sat in the square this afternoon in this great huge tractor there, which filled 2/3 of the street, we thought, this agriculture today has become pretty tyrannical. So to go back to those early days and even before, because Steiner characterizes 3 epochs of human nutrition. And these are pictures. I don't think he ever wanted us to fix things in a kind of diagrammatic way, but just to develop picture thinking. Because when we can think in images rather than sound bites, we'll have more of a grasp on what has gone before us, what's happening now, it's the phenomenological process, and what might happen in the future. It's up to us. It really is up to us. So these epochs were, the first one being the milk and honey. The second one, the bread and the wine. This is the agrarian time. And the third one, which we are now in, is the mineral one. Mineral supplements. So we'll look at that. But do you think that we've always been like this, with this consciousness, with the relationship that we have in them between women, our ability to move about the earth's surface? Have we always thought like this? We really do need to know that there was a completely different consciousness in those early days. And we can only imagine it. But the nomadic people who lived on milk and honey, the ancient Indian epoch, the milk was sacred. And it's very sad to see how badly kind of presented milk is these days, and we can understand why. But galaxy is to do with lactate. You know, the whole cosmos was woven into this galactic, this, what Steiner calls is a kind of, it gave the human being a kind of gentle tie to the earth, and said that milk is actually more plant-like than animal, in that it doesn't come into contact with the blood system of the animal. So milk was the gift of the gods. The tribal people looked after their animals. They did not kill them. They used the milk and this wonderful wild honey, which they also collected, were kind of two archetypal foods. So milk that tied us gently to the earth, and honey, and the grains. These grains came in almost as a kind of gift from the planetary beings, the holy rishis. I don't really know enough about the holy rishis. I'm sure Tom could tell me. I think I've asked him about that and I've forgotten. 7 grains, these amazing grains. Each grain actually provided a whole civilization with their main food. Can anybody tell me what those are? I want you to be working at this story too. Can we have some grains and some cultures that have been nourished and really thought them sacred? Yeah?
Millet.
Millet.
Barley.
Barley.
Spelt.
Spelt, yes, it's an ancient wheat, spelt. Yes.
Corn.
Sorry?
Barley.
B-E-R-E. It's growing on Orkney.
I don't quite hear that one.
It's spelt B-E-R-E and I think it's pronounced bear. It's
Well, no,
it's one of the
no.
earliest forms of, I'm not sure if it's oat, it's barley or wheat, but
Oh, lovely. Okay, well, we could look into that.
I think it's fairly inedible if you bake bread. With just that, I think you have to mix it with
Yes.
normal stuff.
Well, I think people are, recultivating those ancient grains. I know people who do. Millet, and this is the grain of China and Africa. And where else are we going to have it?
India.
In India now.
Ancient grain of India.
Ancient grain. Many different varieties of millet. It's very high in silica. Anyway, these, I'd like you to pass these, a couple of these around just to see if people recognise them. Because particularly that one. So this is this new agriculture. And it's going to be very different from collecting your food or the food which is a total gift of the gods. I mean, these were people who were led in groups by shaman, by priests. They were like little flocks of sheep. They were clumped together. And yeah, food came as a gift. So now we have a development of agriculture. What's one of the first things you have to do when you have a piece of land?
The plough, I suppose.
And close it.
Who said that? Yeah, well done. You put a fence around. And of course the nomads saw these juicy crops and juicy cattle wandering about and didn't understand that this was now being taken care of. Somebody takes land on, says, I'm the custodian now. And he can grow more than enough for his own family. This can now be stored. So you have a completely different way of life. And the story of Cain and Abel is not the first fratricide in history, but it's a metaphor for the shepherd, Abel, being taken over by the agrarian, Cain. So this is a new development. And when you put a fence around something and you imagine that being done to you, this is the beginning of parceling off. It's the beginning of this, falling out of this graciousness, out of group soul little drops of water, just, really enjoying that kind of innocence, to this more conscious way of living. The grains were usually ground rather roughly and coarse ground, and made into a porridge and then put on hot stones. Not very good for the teeth, as you can see from worn teeth of those ancient people. But then came the lovely Egyptians who, above other things, cherished the garlic and the allium family. The children had necklaces of garlic to keep away the dark spirits. So this is one of the things that apparently there's a plaque on the pyramids to say this. They also fermented a lot of their barley into beer. The red barley of the Nile. And out of this fermentation process, some of the beer balm would have gone into the grain paste. So what do you have then? Speak up. We've got some cooks in this audience.
Sourdough.
Yes, very good. They had the possibility of having yeasted breads. And within a very short period of time, they had at least 40 different varieties, with dates, with coriander, with pomegranate. Dates had 360 uses. But you've got a portable, more digestible food now. These are big steps in human. It can, you put it in your back pocket, and you've got food for several days or whatever. So I'm going to also now mention, I'm glad that this lily and rose became very useful this morning. It's so beautiful. Does anybody know what these represent? Apart from Zarathustra, six-pointed lily.
Love and purity.
Sorry?
Love and purity.
Yes. But they are also archetypes of the two food families. So the monocotyledons, which is the liliaceae, all the cereals come from this family, the alliums, the garlic, the leeks, the onions, and all the cereals, and the rosaceae, from which our fruits develop. So if you see the lily and the rose in a sacred painting, these are, they are manifestation of this wonderful kind of development that we've had. And the choice we have now that have come from these two plant families. And I just see them also as these two fluids that we have in the body today. We are meditating. The fluids circulate around our body. The milk, which is a gift, and it is very uncomfortable if it can't be expressed, it can't be shared and taken from the mother. And the blood. Blood's very uncomfortable on the outside of the body. So we've got the blood and the milk and the blood, the monocotyledons and the dicotyledons, all the food plants just symbolized in these two amazing plants. See, if we're going to live in a materialistic society, we have to know what material is, what matter is. We take this miracle of a body from A to B every day, ask it to do incredibly silly things, without knowing, how things are acting upon us, and particularly, our food. It's a mystery for most people, and you feed a baby, give it a spoonful of its first solid food, it's going to come out. What are you giving me of the world? Spinach, and you spoon it back in. And each food actually is a poison. If it was injected into the bloodstream, it would be toxic. So every food, every bit of assimilation we are tasting the earth, we're digesting the earth. And this is the most important thing we need to know, is that each food is actually, giving to the entire metabolic a message from the universe. And if we don't cook it and then chew it, you know, we won't actually get the message that this food is likely to give us. And out of a kilo of food that we take in on average a day, guess how much is really assimilated? 5 grams. It's a salt teaspoonful out of a whole kilo. And Steiner said it's not the food that actually nourishes you, it's the forces that you meet when you're demolishing it, when you're using this catabolic process. And these are the 2 processes on which the human being is built. The anabolic, which is the upbuilding, and the catabolic, which is the destructive process. And those have to be in balance. And in our society, they are not. Anyway, we'll move on. We've got these wonderful grains. Those people are being nourished. The American Indians have got other like quinoa. It's not one of these 7 grains. And so now we come to what happens in the agrarian revolution after all these wonderful, wonderful grains have come. We are getting to a more dense point. And we're going to get to the Greeks. What did the Greeks do?
The olive.
Well, yes, the Cretans were particularly good at bringing the olive into cultivation. Thanks to Peggy, we've got, and this is a bottle of spun sunlight. The grains are also spun sunlight. They're very, very efficient at binding in light, and that's why they've been so important. 24%. Very few plants can do that. So this is what we're looking for, is light in our food. And the Cretans developed the olive, which if you've ever tried to prune a wild olive tree, you know it's quite a task to bring an olive tree into production. So this is spun sunlight. And Cretans and the Greeks invented the outdoor life, the Olympic Games. Their temples are in balance. So if you stand inside a Greek temple, you will feel human. And food was still very much a spiritual thing. They did not, this is when they're at their peak, everything becomes decadent, obviously. They wouldn't eat meat except at sacrificial times. But the oracles were there, the spirits were speaking out of every bush and every tree. Everything was alive and in movement. And in Greek friezes, you see the movement of the garments, and still very connected to the heavens. But they brought wine, and Steiner said the wine had a mission of forgetfulness. Now, have you ever heard of these ideas before? These are ideas, if you hear a new idea and it's weird, Dr. Nace once said to us, he's a lovely philosophical doctor, he said, never say no, just say oh. So the idea of wine having a mission of forgetfulness. Because he said we were at that time still connected through the pineal to the clairvoyant aspect of life. We knew that this was not home. That our real home was in the spiritual realms. And the pineal allowed us to see right through this veil of Maya, which we are now clouded over. And wine, because it brings a kind of superficial and horizontal brotherhood, takes the attention away from the heavens, more, towards brethren, if you like, brotherhood. I'll buy the next round, sort of thing. we're going into a more, if we'll look at the process of fermentation too, and acidity, and how it's helping to kind of make us more earthbound, more earthly, more dense, more gravity bound. And wine had a big mission. So with the Greeks, there were the Bacchanalian and the Dionysian orgiastic parties when it became decadent. So if you look at these substances, and I forgot to mention that with the ancient Persians, they had something called hum, or homa, which I'm still trying to discover what exact. I think it was barley and mint and milk fermented. It's this fermentation thing. People are very keen on it now, but we must look at what fermentation does to your spiritual, physical relationship. So it was hom that the Persians had, and it induced holy enthusiasm. So all of these things are trying to kind of take us out of our everyday consciousness, which probably even then was, it's quite painful to be in a body. It's quite painful to be a human being, and it gets more and more so, the more conscious we become. So fermentation. This was initially only given by the priests. So it was sacred, it was holy. And then when it was let loose in these, Dionysian revelries, then we know maybe we're going through a recapitulation of those days. But let's think about something as having a mission of forgetfulness. And this next thing, the Greeks also started to use, and I'm going to ask you to look it around and take a little bit and see what happens when you take this. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'd be interested in having some. What did the Greeks then start to do apart from the Olympic Games and beautiful temples and olive oil?
Philosophy.
Yes! I think a man. Debate, philosophy, and this substance, you see, it's a mineral, and we have minerals, we have salts in all sorts of forms, but now this is being taken as an external additive to the food. Can anybody say what it's done to them?
It's a good method of awakening, enhancing this.
Pulls you in.
Yeah, pulls you in, but it's also, there's such a thing as a salt phantom, I understand, which means that it's kind of can be traced in the tips of your fingers and the tips of your hair within seconds of taking it in. So it's sodium chloride, two wily minerals by themselves. So it's yin and yang, it goes deep down and out. And Steiner says we need to salt our food in order to be able to think. Obviously there's got to go how much you can take for it to be effective. And of course, there's a lot of addiction with that too. But minerals. Salary is the Roman term for your wages being weighed out in salt. That was how important it was. Have you come across these ideas before? Because I don't think many nutritionists are talking about substances as these things that have come in at very, very specific times in our history that kind of changed the biochemistry. And I'm looking at this procession which is leading more and more to addiction. And we are addicted. And you cannot be free if you have addictions. And the project for the human being is to be free. I think, so do some other people. But can you be free when you are being led in the direction that more and more you can't function without certain things. Well, the next thing was the spice trade. Yeah, would you like to just pass a few? The spices were, they're seeds, they're buds, these are cloves. You only need one in a whole pan of stewed pears and you get it. They're so dense in their aromas, it's on the etheric level. When you get to smell something, it's operating on the etheric level. Got little pieces of bark, seeds, very expensive. Peppercorns. I mean, Venice was importing thousands of tons of peppercorns. So you've got salt, you've got pepper. Pepper is an irritant. You'll get these on aeroplanes, in cafes. Do we ever ask ourselves, why have we got these two? Salt. Where have they come from? Why are they there? What is it costing the planet, our own digestion? Let's think about these things because they're there. And the spice trade was a very lucrative thing, particularly to the Arabs, who were very good at it. And can you imagine what we'd all be eating now? Turnips and barley. What would you be eating here in Ireland? The potato hasn't come in yet. What would you be having here? Bones? Bones? Oats? Goats? Oats? Oats? You'd be having oats, very good. But what else? A few veggies?
Meat.
A few goats.
Turnips, cabbages and oats.
Cabbages, what?
Fish.
Fish? But can you imagine if you've never had a curry or we had curry today? Seaweed. Yes, thank you, good. That's, see, we just think it's there and we don't think about why and what's led us there. We've been led to every corner of the earth looking for new sensational things. And dear Christopher Columbus, 1492, came back with some of these things, and someone's very kindly managed to find a bit of, this belongs to the Solanaceae family. What is it? The backpack. Did you know it was part of the nightshade family? The Solanaceae family. The potato now seems to have supplanted these grains. I know young people who live on 2 nightshades, chips and tomato ketchup. It's not really funny. Is that a basis for forming a human being, a bone structure, a thinking apparatus? And this is very strange stuff. Airy, cold, you wouldn't eat potatoes raw, would you? Tomatoes, we all love tomatoes. But, you know, the early potatoes would have been about that big. And what they did was slice them up and leave them under the moon, the stars for days. They tromped them, you know, like we do grapes for wine. And they had tuna houses, freeze-dried potatoes, which was their store for the winter. And they would not have eaten them without maize and squash and beans. That was the kind of sacred combination. So the way that the potato, and we know what it's done to Ireland to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, it had such a huge impact on this particular country. There's one cold, watery substance, which I've been looking at the structure of the starch granules, which Hashgood. And if you look at cereal grains, they are structured in very rhythmic, concentric starch granules, whereas a potato is chaotically organized. So these are things to think about, quite apart from, you know, it's got vitamin C, it's got water, it's got minerals. None of that really adds up to where it's come from, when it came in, and what is it doing to us? And most of our life-threatening illnesses these days are cold illnesses, where the blood temperature drops, the cancers and the AIDS. Whereas before we've had fever-accompanied illnesses, where the fever would burn off the virus. But I'm not saying this is all true, it's a picture. And I'd love people to, because I'm trying to research this more deeply. I think it's a very important story. When you get cold, airy things, what a good cook does though is to bring salt and heat and oil to something so airy, cold. It's very light for how big it is. I mean, these are very, and the flowers are strange. And the tobacco, Steiner said that tobacco came in to throttle down the desire life. I think that's really interesting because we've got the wine, you have a glass of wine, it spans, and that's what we want to do. We want to get out of this body, I suppose. Most of the drugs are getting people out of their body. And this idea of being embodied is so important, and I think so central to all the education. But at any rate, so puffing a cigarette is going to push down your desire levels. Expansion, contraction. Tobacco, Columbus. And then we get 3 drinks, and they go straight into the blood system. I'm rushing through this now because you're all going to go and have supper in 5 minutes time. Having digested all this, we've got coffee, and to drink coffee you have to ferment it and then roast it. All this is mineralizing. There's chocolate, cocoa, which is now, totally addictive. It's packaged in a very sexy way, nice foil, and raw chocolate, it's all the thing. And tea. Now, we used to be a nation of tea drinkers, and now it's coffee. Coffee shops everywhere. Everybody who sells coffee gets £1 profit per cup. No wonder it's such a big business, but there's an addiction there. There's an addiction. And the people who are growing these luxury crops for us, in Guatemala, in Brazil, in Ethiopia, are not able to grow crops for their own families. So much land is being used in these monocultures, which are incredibly destructive for the people whose countries they're being grown in. Now, I like a cup of coffee, we all do. 1 cup of coffee, maybe 2 maximum, and a cup of tea. I mean, all these things obviously do have a place, but in the end, we have to be able to say how much is enough. How much is enough? Because at the moment, it's gone completely out of whatever it is. And of course we had to, they were also disgusting in their raw state. You have to have what with it? Everybody wants to see what sugar does. Okay, so do you know already? It's not enough, the salt. It's pure, white and deadly, and battles for both polarity. Sugar, sweetness is the heavenly pole. The first food you ever have, your mother's milk, is incredibly sweet. And salt is the earthly pole. Greeks, thinking, individuation, citizenship, then the Romans, who took it further and further and further and were militaristic. But into that Roman kind of gladiatorial society where they changed their roads to decimal to move armies down quickly from the zodiacal 12 to decimal, fast, militaristic, lots of meat eating, wine bibbing, and they had something called liquamen, which they put on everything. It was rotted herrings, salt and old wine, and they even put it in puddings. I think Liam Perrin's sauce is probably a remnant of that. But again, it's this fermented food. You couldn't germinate a seed in wine, could you? What's this telling us? It's mineralized, and in a certain way it's dead. Nevertheless, into this Roman militaristic paradigm came Jesus Christ, who brought a new sacrament, and he brought the bread and the wine. No more blood sacrifices. These are two products of the soil to create a new sharing. And Rudolf Steiner says that an ideal will be when, as the Last Supper, everybody can share the same meal. At the moment it's, oh, I need this, or I'm allergic to that, or I'm trying this diet out, or whatever. And that's something maybe we have to go through. But ultimately this sharing, not necessarily the wine, we have grape juice there too in the Christian community. Yes. But these amazing kind of new consciousness. I don't think Christianity has begun, frankly. I think the consciousness that came with Christ was grafted onto the Roman militaristic paradigm, and the real Christianity was forced underground. But those principles of a new morality, place of women, prodigal son story, it wasn't the goody-goody who got the party given for him. Everything is turned upside down. And with this, looking at this way of looking at nutrition, modern reductionistic nutritional science is turned upside down. This brings another way of looking at things that gives us a choice. It's how children are reared too, really, giving them milk and honey. And when they get to be teenagers, they want something more zappy. But to be having this as the accomplishment of 21,000, how many years, millions of years, and this is really past this around. And smell it, and just have a smell, because this is what a lot of people, they say that, poor people can't afford anything other. But is this the accomplishment of all these years? Struggle, these wonderful hierarchies that have given us this opportunity to be human beings, to have a consciousness that will reflect on the importance of this earth, of each other, of the plant kingdom, of the animal kingdom. Just hearing those cows this morning, it's pretty unbearable as they were crying. We've got a lot to repair. We have a lot to repair, and that's why I'm so glad to be here, because I wasn't going to be here, and it's a last minute thing, and I'm jolly glad to have the opportunity to share what's going on here. And just lastly, to the ultimate mineral, because this is the building block of everything, carbon. Carbohydrates, building block of everything. But it's also, when subjected to heat and pressure, becomes the diamond. And this we can think of as a metaphor for our own spiritual development. That we have gone through this falling into matter. We're now, yes, you can see people taking mineral supplements because they sense their food doesn't have it, and they are very important, these trace minerals. But we can't always eat them separately. They have to be chelated into food. And that's why I think the biodynamic process is so incredible. And I'm such a supporter of the biodynamic movement. And at this moment, this is a lovely party trick. You all know this. This is the first food we hear mentioned in the Bible. Got into a lot of trouble. But anyway, this is the 5-pointed star of Venus. And it shows us that the cosmos is embedded in all our foods. We don't have to look too hard to see the imprint. We've got to be aware of this cosmic dance in which we are a part, and to continually communicate with these great beings that give us stuff like this. You couldn't create that. You might be able to have all the things that make up an apple, but no human being could create that, could they? Or that, really, might have been, tampered with. We mustn't tamper with things, and how amazing to have Michael Schmidt here, who's pioneering untreated milk. It's really hard now to get even organic milk. It's not being homogenised, but I won't go into that. That is really a very quick rush through all these epochs of food, and we say, what do we really need? What can we choose? Can we go back to something that is more wholesome and delicious? And you can get a lot of grain. But to see all this maize being grown for cattle fodder, I think is tragic. It just breaks my heart. Nothing but maize. It's either going for biofuels or cattle fodder. We can say no. We can choose with our choices. That is consciousness soul development, and it's jolly painful. But unless we do it, we're going to be lost. So, are there any questions or comments?
I read an article in The Guardian yesterday. It was partly sponsored by Board Beer.
By which board?
Board Beer. It's, I think it was set up by the government in this country to try and get all food producers in the country to produce the food sustainably. They've got a target, I forget the actual figures. It's a bit of a tall order, but fair play to them for trying.
Very good.
I always try and buy food with the Board Beer label on it, because it's the only food that you can guarantee is actually sourced
How are
and
you
produced
spelling
in
that? I
Ireland.
don't know this.
B-O-R-D-B-I-A-B-N Food.
Food
board.
Oh, food, sorry. Oh, yes. Good.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, sustainability is a bit of a buzzword, and we have to unpick that a bit.
They tried a similar scheme in the UK, and they call it the Red Factor scheme. But I think it's lost its credibility. I think that it's been diluted so much since the original concept that it's almost worthless now, unfortunately. got that by agri.
Yes. Yes. Hello.
It's just so wonderful to hear you talking about the choices and the consciousness soul, because really the consumer is the contract giver. We give the contract the yes or no to go ahead or not. So it's so great to hear that.
Thank you.
Wendy, I'm aware that portion sizes are going up all the time, and partly that's, people are getting obese as a result of portion sizes going up, but I don't think that's all. I think the more we're speeded up out of our own sense of self, so that we're not with our bodies as we eat. I was fascinated that you said it takes a kilogram of food for us to take in 5 grams. And I think the more people are out of balance and the more people are speeded up, the more they then need 2 kilograms to get that 5 grams. And you hear about the people who were sort of having meals in Japan 30 years ago and being given a tiny bowl and then saying, okay, that's the starters, where's the main course? No, that was it. Because I guess they'd all done their tea ceremonies and they were much more present. And they could actually get what they needed from much less food. And so to me that's the other aspect of it, is we need to be much more conscious as we're eating. And then we literally don't need to produce so much out of the earth.
Well, that's also to do, what I also try and focus on is, the community building aspect of sharing food together. The table is beautifully set, you have time not to rush, that you chew, you meet each other, and that's an important event in the day. It's not just fuel to be gotten over and done with. So I just come from France, I've lived in Mallorca a lot of my life, where 2 hours is set aside for eating and meeting. And, you know, it's a priority. In France, they haven't lost that. Respect for the table, for the food. That's, you know, that's what we need to encourage in our homes and communities, I think. And cooking, teaching people to cook. You teach people here. I'd like to meet whoever's doing that. But anyway, I think it's time for you to have supper and I'll be in trouble with the cooks.